Welcome to this episode of the Gramophone Podcast. I'm Martin Cullingford, editor of Gramophone, and I'm very honoured to be joined today by three key musicians behind a really fascinating new album on the Platoon label. It's called Növények, which is the title of a setting by Thomas Adès of 7 Hungarian poems for mezzo-soprano and piano sextet. And today I have with me the composer, Thomas Adès, and Alessandro Ruisi and Luba Tunnicliffe from the Ruisi Quartet. Hello to all three of you.
Hey.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Now, I should say, as I'm sure it will feed into the conversation as we go, that along with Növények, the album also contains a Haydn string quartet in G minor, opus 20, number 3, and a Ligeti song, legszebb Virág, arranged for string quartet. But let's turn firstly to the song cycle. 7 poems by 4 significant Hungarian poets. Perhaps you can share the origins of the cycle, why these poems, and indeed who are the poets, and why for these particular musical forces.
I think this must be one for me. Yes, well, the first song to be written was actually what's now number 2 in the cycle, and that was originally for a very different group of instruments. It was one of my first pandemic period pieces. And that poem by Miklos Radnóti I found in a book of his poems that was parallel translations in Hungarian and English. I don't speak Hungarian, but I had this book. My father actually gave it to me. He has several books in this particular series of his own translations. And anyway, this one particular poem, Gyökér, which means root, I wanted to set it somehow for a while. And then an opportunity arose in that period when we were all at home and people were doing sort of Zoom concerts and that sort of thing. And I wanted to write it for Kati Karoli, and actually for the ensemble that Ligeti wrote his piece for her, which is singer and 4 percussionists. So I wrote it for 4 marimbas, which that piece actually has. And her, and then piano strings at the end, and we did it with Kati in Budapest, me in London playing the piano strings, and the marimba player in Mexico, and made a video of that. And so then that was this sort of rather slightly weird standalone thing that would go with the Ligeti, but not really with anything else much. And then this opportunity arose through Prussia Cove to expand it and give it some friends and family, and that's when I reached out to Kati and said what we could have as a song cycle where there's a common theme, and that theme ended up being imagery of plants. So together we found the other 6 poems. There were going to be 5 at one point, and then we just felt it would be nice to have 7.
And it's interesting that this became the starting point and then became the second poem. It's a sort of darkest poem, I feel, certainly the darkest work, a poem that was written by the poet who was murdered by the authoritarian regime. And in fact, this poem was found on him when he was exhumed, which gives it a quite powerful resonance, particularly also the word sort of root as well in there.
Yes, it is about being buried, actually. And it doesn't get much darker than that, than the story of poor Radnóti. It's a very powerful text. I think whether I'd have managed to set these poems in the order that they get performed, I'm not sure, but you're right. That one took a minute to work out where to put it in the cycle. Actually, in the end, the order of the songs in this whole the cycle is chronological to the period of each poet. So Attila József is the first, and then Radnóti, who's from the Second World War period, and Veres, who's after, and then Otto Orban, who's almost a contemporary of ours. I mean, he's dead now, but quite recently.
And it's interesting was that that obviously works chronologically, but is there sort of a path, a journey musically through it all? I mean, certainly listening to it, it almost feels towards the end, even sort of midway through the 6th, that there becomes a sort of slightly greater sense of peace. And the final poem, which says by Otto Orban, almost feels sort of like it's hinting at sort of classical romantic songs, or certainly that's how I perceived it. You sort of move from the darkness through there.
I think there is a feeling of a journey that you pass through in the whole cycle. Yes, hope so.
Alexandra and Luba, where did you then come into this whole project?
Well, as Tom said, it all kind of happened through IMS Prussia Cove. And we'd worked with Tom in Prussia Cove, I think, was it 2019?
I think it was before that.
Okay, at some point we'd worked with Tom there. And then, we absolutely loved that experience. And then we felt extremely grateful when Tom asked us to help bring this piece to life as well. So we were there one September, and it felt like quite an incredible time where we had a whole week to dive into this piece and this very special environment. I don't know if you've ever been down there, but there's something almost like supernatural in the air and the landscape and the wildness. And we were kind of closed off from the world a little bit, with the only focus on diving into this piece and discovering all its jewels. Yeah.
I think you were playing Haydn, I'm pretty sure.
The first time we played to you, yeah.
Now, as you say, it certainly sounds like a perfect setting for exploring a work which, as you say, it's about the metaphor of botanical images for human condition, and Növények itself means plants. And I imagine being in that natural environment must have given a resonance to the imagery that the poetry contains.
I think you find yourself in that room reaching very naturally for imagery from the natural world, because your surroundings are actually pretty much broadly unchanged from what they would have been in the time that Haydn was writing. Or there's not that much to him. You've got electric lights, but that's about it, really. And so the feeling of his world and the classical world is very, very close to where you are, more than it would be in an urban environment, I think. So that was that. And the other little thing which is nice for me was that was the room in which I used to be taught in my town by Kurtag, who's the dedicatee actually of the second song, and so there is a bit of a kind of root-like link for me there in that place.
We often talk about how a language informs music when it's set and it's played. And I wondered what you could tell me, Thomas, about how the characteristic nature of the Hungarian language informed the way you shaped the musicality of the songs and the words as you set them.
I found it much more grateful to set than English can be, English poetry, partly because being, I think the word is an agglutinative language, so the words, instead of having a lot of little words as you do in English, you tend to make the existing word longer by adding a bit to the end of it, if you need to say of or to or in or these kind of things. There's much fewer small fiddly conversational words than there are in English. So that means that the kind of percentage of the language which is poetry and imagery is much higher. It's like kind of 95%, whereas in English it's sort of 60%. So it means that's very helpful for me, composer like me. I like to have each syllable is given a note of its own that's part of the music, and so it's not like recitative so much, whereas English, even the great English poetry tends to be rather chatty and conversational, and that's trickier. So that was good, and it is very crystalline, very clear. It really is like crystals, the language, and things and there's also a lot of brilliant, especially in Virág, there's a lot of wonderful word play, a kind of odd rhymes, internal rhymes. So, and it's just got a very grateful musical grammatical structure somehow.
I noticed in the booklet notes you have a conversation with the poet George Surtees, and himself of Hungarian birth, though has lived in the UK since he was 8, and so there's a fascinating relationship there between language and his country of origin. And I interviewed him a few years ago myself, and he talked then about Hungarian's pure and sustained and clearly marked vowel sounds, and also what he described as sort of fully articulate consonants, which he felt lends the language a sort of potential harshness. Does that sort of sound familiar to you when absorbing the language and giving it a musical dimension?
I mean, one person's harshness is another one's kind of clarity and incisiveness, and it's a very clear language. It's and that's, I mean, George knows 100,000 times better than me, but that I did find that, yes, as well. And it's what's the word? You can see the edges of the ideas very clearly, and so he expressed, like, some of the poetic ideas in this, like the fourth song, branch as ag. That's a very subtle concept that Veresh is communicating there, but he does it with very few words, very beautifully, very clearly, and you feel that it couldn't be expressed in any other way. You just have to read the poem to get what that is. So and that's there's a kind of, again, it's crystalline, so that's hard edged.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Alexandra and Luba, when playing the music, is there something in any sense characteristically Hungarian about how you see it on the score and then bring it to life through your instruments? And thinking about it also in the context of other Hungarian composers.
I would say that there are a lot of points I noticed where there are sort of these emphases on the beginning of the phrase, on the beginning of the notes, and I've noticed that being a pattern in other Hungarian work. And I remember working with Tom on certain bits, and I think there were certain points where, Tom, when you wanted us to kind of lean on these a little bit more, and I would say the shapes felt pretty Hungarian to me. What about you?
I don't know, really. I mean, the whole process felt like, I don't know, I almost didn't feel so much like a violinist when we were doing that, but more just a kind of explorer. And I get, maybe that had something to do with the language as well, but also, having Tom in the room while we were discovering it all the time, it also felt like we were discovering the music straight from the feeling as well, somehow. And I don't know, it just that sense of exploring and newness of it. So I'm not sure so much how it relates to the Hungarian language, but it certainly from a playing language felt quite unique, actually, I would say.
I mean, it certainly struck me listening to it that the voice, so sort of richly characterful, felt very much an instrument in terms of its timbres, distinct sounds, every bit as much as any instrument in the wider ensemble. The singer, as we already mentioned, is the mezzo Catalin Caroli, and that's clearly in the writing. But perhaps can you talk about the integration of voice into the wider musicality, both from the compositional perspective, but also in terms of the performance aspect?
Yeah, that's a really nice question, actually, because what Ali was touching on there, that the voices and the instruments are. I'm trying to, if you like, remove the boundaries between the voice and the instruments, as the things, as the poems have slightly removed the boundaries between us and plants. And just a quick footnote: Növények, really, it's plants, but the root of the word is growing, things that grow. So, like, without Ligeti piece called ramifications, it's rather that things that ramify, rather than plants. Obviously, in English is a thing that it's about it being stuck in the ground. The Hungarian idea is really different. So we are also things that grow. Humans are, and so in the voice, I wanted it to just be another instrument, but one where instead of a bow with accents and down bows and up bows, it has consonants and vowels. the Hungarian language, all words, I believe I'm right in saying, are stressed on the first syllable, sometimes quite strongly. So it has this very characteristic, rather insistent rhythm. And that was, you can hear it in the first poem, for example. I remember we talked about this, which is, I'll be a gardener. It's for Attila Joseph saying, if the world's already dying, I'm just going to look after my plants. And
As a very young man.
yeah, I know. It was there, unfortunately, that, the very sort of Modi cursed figure, him, hugely important in Hungary. But I'm getting off point that there are you can hear him stepping. I wanted to sound like he's walking around on the sort of gravel path at the beginning, and so it's not. You have to play a little bit more pointedly than you would. And so to me, I really think that gestures in music come from human, are related to. Of course they are. I mean, because that's one of the features, I think, of classical music, the way I think of it, that it's humans, actual people, blowing into an instrument or moving with their arms up and down. It's not it's part of the body, and that applies to all instruments in the orchestra equally. But it's not just pressing a button. Not that, but of course it could be. It could be something that's electric, but it's got to come from the human side of it. And so the same is true of the language and of the thing. If you see Kati performing it, it actually puts everything into it. It's not just someone standing and singing and reading. It's a real embodiment. That's the word I want.
I think I was just remembering some moments in rehearsals where there are lots of moments when we are providing a color to go with the voice, but there would also be some times when Kati would be singing at a particular resonance, and then she would say, hang on a sec, I heard my voice sort of over there in that instrument. And that was a really lovely thing to experience. Just, it really felt like the sound was so kind of so together and so kind of we got it really integrated at points. It was very special.
You remember in the last song that it was really precise. It's not just that the first syllable is emphasized, but the exact rhythm in which it's said, and in Joker as well. It's so specific, and I tried to write it down, as Kati would say, and then we'd occasionally have to play around with it, and but because everything she sings you have to play with exactly that syllabically. In a way, the music's quite simple, but because of it had to be, she said, no, you can't, this syllable has to be slightly longer than that one, because there's a double letter or whatever it is, or if it might even, the meaning of the word might change if you don't do a double umlaut or this kind of things they have. So we all had to participate in the physicality of these rhythms as an ensemble.
Yeah. No. I mean, one can hear that. And I also thought there were moments in the score which felt very, quite intensely descriptive. I thought of the third song. It sounded very much that sense of being in a meadow, insects sort of dancing in quite intense way. And maybe that's me reading it because I've read the text along to listening, but that's certainly how I felt. Is that something that was there present in the idea and the performance?
That's the most difficult one, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
When you had to be the daisies.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Actually, I remember, Tom called me before we started working on it, and I remember him, we were trying to translate this idea onto the violin, and I remember, I think you had an electric keyboard or something, and it was really high. I knew it was going to be in the stratosphere, and then it was like, and we were just be like, yeah, I can do that, yeah. And then also, I remember also a moment in rehearsal where we were doing this bit. We kind of found something and it was working, but it was kind of tricky, but it's very, exact as well. And I was slightly struggling with some of this, and then Tom would lean in and be like, "Oh, Ali, I think the A might be slightly sharp." I was like,
Yeah.
But actually, she was inspiring for me because at the beginning of that song is where I'm kind of imitating Catty in a way, and to see how she starts this. So always, it's tricky stuff, but when you have someone there bringing it to life at every moment in rehearsal or concert, you can't help but just kind of be completely inspired by that and find these incredibly elusive sounds. I mean, that was the joy of it, actually. That was like, it felt very different to working on other things. It wasn't an everyday thing.
Yeah. The Brahms and the Beethovens, which are amazing, but very much feel like they're on the ground. This felt like it was kind of floating around in somewhere quite ethereal. And you never really know what's going to happen in the performance, which is really lovely.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I mean, how often have you performed it together?
Have there been maybe 4 performances?
So we did Paris.
Which was a year ago today, actually.
Was it? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
that many.
In the Wigmore.
Yeah.
Was there another one as well?
I don't know if there was.
No.
There will be.
And of course, the recording itself was,
So it was recorded within a studio context where you were able to continue to explore it within that setting, rather than it being sort of done almost as live. You were able to really focus in on what you wanted the recording to capture.
It was really luxurious for me, and we could really go into a lot of detail. And I loved, to be honest, I loved not being the pianist. I loved that it was Joe playing, so that we could. I mean, he plays so wonderfully, and I could sit back and really listen to everything and get it just right. It's always just right in concerts too, but there's something about having that time. That the songs are mostly very short, and to just be able to kind of go over and over, just to really make everything clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was your first set of songs for quite a number of years, wasn't it? I mean, why were you sort of drawn back to the form?
I did little operas and things in between. Maybe the previous song, there was a thing called Life Story that I actually wrote in that room in 1992 or something, in the room where we met in Pressure Cove, and I think I wanted to do that for a long time, but there were lots of big juggernauty type pieces in the way. I just had to wait for them to go past before I could move back into the sort of song lane.
No, I was going to say that at the beginning of the conversation we talked about the connection to Haydn, and that you were hearing the Ruisi Quartet playing Haydn. Can we talk a bit about the particular string quartet on this album, the G minor Opus 20 number 3, and why the particular link here to your music, Tom, and the shape of the album, therefore?
Well, I mean, Haydn. We were talking earlier. We don't think we've ever performed a concert that hasn't included a Haydn quartet, and maybe some people would find that unimaginative, but I think for us it's just, there's just so much to explore, and obviously so many incredible quartets, and so different as well. And it was just, for us, it was okay, we're doing a record, there will be Haydn on it, kind of thing, just because it's just incredible music. And this quartet in particular, I think what kind of why we wanted to include this one, we performed it quite a lot before, and it's something so irregular about this quartet in some ways. It's rhythmic structures are weird, phrase lengths are weird, there are little things just tacked on all the time, and it's very witty but also extremely graceful. And it felt, the more and more we performed it, like it's the perfect kind of, we want to keep the feeling of basically it's improvised. I don't know, somehow this quartet, to me anyway, it just feels like improvisation. And I think actually recording it was probably annoying for Andrew Keener, because if it felt like takes would be, we do a second take of something and suddenly it'd be like completely different. Other stuff would happen, and then I mean, luckily I think in the end we didn't edit it very much actually, but so it was better. But there's just
there's so much freedom in the music, and I think the way we work on Haydn, the way we discover it, it was very similar actually to the way we worked on Növények. Just really spending time getting into the characters and stuff, but keeping it very spontaneous. I mean, that's what we like to do with Haydn.
It's really interesting because it was making me think of, you remember the sixth song where because of the way all the entries follow each other and these kind of long, and the coordination, it means that it's unlikely to be the same any two performances. There'll be slight differences in the way it ends, and that's built in, because the whole poem is about the sort of letting go and being part of a great sequence of a garland, it calls it, of humanity. But what you're saying about the Haydn, that rings a bell with me, because I think of him, Haydn, especially in this quartet, you can really hear, but I think of him as a sort of one of those 18th century philosopher, scientist, almost naturalist, almost like somebody who's a kind of these kind of people that you had then at those kind of courts, who's quite, and they would look at the natural world and philosophy as a kind of linked thing. It's that Enlightenment thing of starting to understand how things in nature were put together. And sometimes with him, you really feel like he's discovered a new species of frog or something in the music. He's gone out into that swamp in Esterhazy for a walk and sort of seen something that's never been seen before, and describes it and looks at it from a philosophical standpoint. And I think some of his pieces, you're really aware that he's almost saying, I actually don't know anything yet. I don't really understand anything about creation, about how things come to be. It's as though that consciousness is beginning in the music. So I think in this is an example of one of the pieces where you can really feel that he's kind of thinking, well, I don't know, maybe. So that
No, that's really interesting, and listening to it after listening to Növények, certainly it's a very expressive quartet, but I was struck by almost a sense of occasionally it would just come to a pause, which certainly in Növények, I think particularly the second and the final song, you have that. And I was hearing that in the Haydn too, and maybe that's what you're saying, that sort of sense of discovery and then moving on after a bit of contemplation, just sort of there, just something one could feel.
Yeah, because very often in Haydn, a silence can be something where a completely different interpretation of everything suddenly is available, and he'll pursue that.
Yeah. No, and I thought that was a lovely link. And then finally, this short and very beautiful transcription of a Ligeti song, Lebseg Virág, the most beautiful flower, a sort of hymn for the love of home, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that song, that one in particular, actually it was after we'd met Catty, and I was just completely obsessed with her. Well, with her. She's just incredible, but also her voice. And then I, devoured lots of recordings, and there was something about her singing that song in particular that really, I don't know, touched me. And I just felt, I want to have a crack at trying to get close to those colours, and just that atmosphere. And that's why I said to Luba, right, I think we have to do this arrangement. And I suddenly had no time, and I was like, oh my God, when are we going to do this? And kind of 2 days later, Luba was like, there you go.
It was interesting trying to recreate the intimacy of the piano, because there's so much warmth in the song, but the accompaniment is super simple, and I wanted to try and recreate that simplicity. I think when things are translated to strings, they can suddenly sound super lush and romantic, and I was trying to keep that in mind, and I think we were trying to keep that in mind in the recording, just keeping it like this very, very special flower that he talks about in the poem, very
Something, deep within the heart, I think he talks about in the poem, and that just, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful arrangement, and when we're playing it, Luba, were you sort of hearing in your head the singing voice as if Katya were singing it? Yes.
Yeah, definitely. It's so kind of pure the way she does it, isn't it? And she also has a slightly folky quality to her voice sometimes, I think. Yeah, that was kind of in my mind.
Yeah, and perhaps that's another thread. We talk about sort of plants, nature, growing, but actually so much of that is connected to folk, to understanding of to that sort of tradition in society, and maybe that's there through the Haydn, through your pieces in Növények, but also certainly in the Ligeti as well.
I believe, well, Josh Surtees told me that Virág, my flower, which is repeated a lot in the last song, Virág is a very common thing that you would say to your partner, as a term of endearment, like my darling, in Hungarian. We don't really have that in English. You wouldn't say my flower; it'd be rather flowery, but that's apparently very normal there. So that parallel between the flower and the person is real, is really there in the language. So the Ligeti is probably being sung to a person rather than a flower. It could equally be. Yeah.
No, that's when you sort of go into the sort of idiomatic phraseology of a language and the way it's just used colloquial, and that's something which can get lost in translation, but perhaps then brought out and communicated through music, which sort of transcends that.
Yeah, and there is a link. It's like that Luba was saying about strings bringing automatically a feeling of romanticness in a stylistic sense. That when you hear Kati singing Brahms, as I've done, she will sing it in that closer to folk music or that simpler way, not in a kind of concert hall-y way. And it's completely convincing. I'm sure that, of course, there's the links with folk music in Brahms, but it's very, very close. In fact, it's absolutely there a lot of the time. You might not think that, but that one might not think that, but it's there. And so that I think that's why I was imagining it for this apparently very romantic ensemble of a piano sextet, but I wanted that not to be like self-consciously modern or one thing or the other. That I wanted it to be timeless in that sense, and that folk music is timeless.
No, brilliant, absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground and it was absolutely fascinating. Thank you, all three of you. Növények, 7 Hungarian poems for mezzo-soprano and piano sextet by Thomas Adès, performed by the Ruisi Quartet, along with mezzo-soprano Katalin Karolyi, pianist Joseph Havlet, and double bassist Graham Mitchell, plus Haydn String Quartet in G minor, opus 20, number 3, and an arrangement of a Leipzig Virág by Ligeti. It's all available on the Platoon label. Thomas Adès, Alessandro Ruisi, and Luba Tunnicliffe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Gramophone Podcast just as much as we did producing and preparing it. And a reminder that you can explore our archive of more than 500 episodes. Simply search for Gramophone wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And talking of subscribing, throughout the month of December, you can find a range of special Christmas subscription offers for Gramophone Magazine itself, as well as for our sister titles, Choir and Organ, International Piano and Opera Now. It would make a perfect gift for a loved one, or indeed even for yourself. Just visit gramophone.co.uk and do look out for another Gramophone podcast next week.